What is the definition of an economist? An economist is somebody who is good with numbers but doesn't have the personality required to be an accountant. Welcome to the 14th episode of the Clive Bird Experiment. This week we'll be diving deep into economics in the book of the week, Economics 3rd edition by Professor Timothy Taylor. So without further ado, let's begin. Economics by Professor Timothy Taylor is a widely recognized and acclaimed textbook that provides a comprehensive introduction to the principles of economics. The 3rd edition of this book was published in 2017 and it incorporates the latest developments in the field of economics. This book took me about 18 hours to read, so it's not an easy read. There is a lot of great information inside this book. The book is written in an accessible style and is suitable for students and general readers alike. The author presents complex economic concepts in a clear and concise manner. He uses real-world examples to illustrate key ideas. The book covers a broad range of topics from macroeconomics, microeconomics, international trade, and economic growth. One of the strengths of the book is it uses real-world examples to explain economic concepts. For example, the author uses the example of the market for gasoline to illustrate the concepts of supply and demand. He also uses examples like the Great Depression to explain the workings of macroeconomic policy. Another strength of the book is its emphasis on the importance of empirical evidence in economics. The author stresses the need for economics to use data and statistical methods. The author stresses the need for economists to use data and statistical methods to test economical theories and hypotheses. The book is also notable for its clear explanations on complex economic theories. The author uses a variety of tools and graphs to illustrate these economic concepts, making it easier for readers to understand the material. One potential weakness of the book is its focus on traditional economic theories and models. Some critics argue that the book does not sufficiently address alternative economic perspectives, such as behavioral economics and ecological economics. But when it comes to behavioral economics, back in episode 4, I discussed behavioral economics by the same group of authors. So hopefully between the two now we can meld together and we can make one cohesive formation of knowledge. Overall, Economics by Professor Timothy Taylor is a well-written and informative textbook that provides an excellent introduction into the principles of economics. And it is suitable for readers and students of all ages. It gives a clear understanding in how our economies operate to this day, and starts making you feel like you can start understanding why our governments are making these decisions that they're making. And we can see it from our point of view whether we believe they're wrong or right, because nobody actually 100% knows what will always happen, because humans are complex creatures and our behaviors do play a massive role in how we conduct our business. So one of the key takeaways from this week's book is right at the beginning, the author discusses how an economist should think. And I think this is important for everybody because we should all be thinking in a similar way. Because what we tend to do is we tend to think for our own self-interest or the immediate around us, but we don't seem to look at the bigger picture. So economists are trained to think systematically and logically about human behavior, decision-making, and the allocation of resources. They use models and data to make predictions and inform policy decisions. To give you an example, in the early 1990s, in the United States, they faced a massive shortage of kidneys for transplants. The demand for kidneys way exceeded the supply, and as a result, hundreds of people were dying every year. In response, Congress passed National Organ Transplant Act of 1984, which made it illegal to buy and sell organs. However, some economists, they argued that by allowing the sales, more organs would be made available, because people would be more willing to donate their kidney for a fee, and this as a result would reduce in a reduction of deaths from kidney failure. To test this hypothesis, a group of economists under an economist of Gary Becker conducted a survey of Americans to determine how much they would take for one of their kidneys. And the survey found that the average American would be happy with $15,000 for a kidney. Armed with this information, the economists proposed a system that regulated organ sales. Under their plan, donors would be compensated for their kidneys, but the market would be regulated to prevent exploitation and ensure that the kidneys went to those at their greatest need. While controversial, the idea gained some traction amongst policymakers and healthcare professionals. In 1997, the American Medical Association formed a task force to study the issue, and in 1999, the Institute of Medicine issued a report recommending further research into the feasibility of a regulated market for organs. And the story of the kidney shortages illustrates how economists think. They start with a problem or a challenge, and they use logic and evidence and data to analyze the situation and propose possible solutions. While not everyone may agree with the ideas of the economists offer a valuable perspective on how to address some of society's most pressing issues. Now, in everyday society, we always have the usual conversations. I mean, I'm a blue-collar worker, I work in industry, and we always have the same conversations: labor, wages. And in lecture 6 in the book, the topic of the labor market and wages is discussed. And here's a great example of how we can pull old ideas and old stories to the future to make a cohesive mesh of knowledge. So in the early 20th century, the Ford Motor Company revolutionized the manufacturing industry with their innovative production methods, including the assembly line. As a result, they were able to produce far more cars quickly and more efficiently than they ever had before. However, the workers on the assembly lines were often paid very low wages, leading to a high turnover and massive dissatisfaction. So in 1913, Ford decided to raise the wages of their workers from $2.34 a day to $5 per day, more than doubling their pay. This was a radical move at the time, as most employers viewed workers as expendable and were not willing to pay them higher wages. Ford's decision to raise the wages was not purely altruistic. They recognized that by paying higher wages, they could attract and retain more skilled workers. They could attract and retain more skilled workers who would be more productive and more efficient. Additionally, by paying higher wages, Ford's workers would be able to afford the cars they were producing, creating a larger market for their products. The decision to raise the wages was met with skepticism by many at the time, but it proved to be a wise business decision. Ford's turnover decreased, productivity increased, and profits soared. The higher wages also created a ripple effect in the economy, as other companies had to compete to attract workers, leading to higher wages across the board. So this story illustrates the importance of wages in the labor market. Employers must balance the need to keep costs low with the need to attract and retain good quality workers. While paying higher wages seems like a cost, it can actually lead to greater productivity and profits in the long run. Additionally, higher wages can create positive feedback loops as workers have more dispensable income to spend in the economy, leading to an increase in demand for goods and services. So that's all. So let's move on to now poverty and welfare. So in lecture 15, the topic of poverty and welfare is discussed. So the best current event story that illustrates the issues related to poverty and welfare is the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on low-income households. So the pandemic has disproportionately affected low-income households, many of whom were already living in poverty before the pandemic. And according to a report by the Brookings Institute, poverty rate increased by 2.4% from January to June 2020, with an estimated 8 million people falling below the poverty line. The pandemic also highlighted various inadequacies of the social safety net, as many households do not have access to paid sick leave or health insurance in America, or the extra strain that was placed on the NHS during COVID, or affordable childcare, making it difficult for them to work or care for their families. Additionally, the unemployment insurance system was overwhelmed by the sheer number of people who lost their jobs due to the pandemic, leading to long delays in receiving benefits and welfare. Various governments had to create loads of additional spending, which essentially was money printed to boost and keep the economy afloat. And this increased money in the economy has led us to the current inflation issues that we're experiencing now. Because when there's a huge amount of money in circulation, and it was essentially a huge amount of free money trying to relieve poverty and welfare, we create other problems further down the line. But the pandemic did highlight the need for stronger social safety nets, especially in the United States, so that it is able to support the low-income households during times of crisis. It has also highlighted the need for policies that address the underlying causes of poverty, such as low wages and inadequate healthcare, to be addressed. I mean, in summary, COVID-19 pandemic had a profound effect on all low-income households in every country, highlighting the need for stronger social safety net programs and policies that address the root cause of the poverty. In lecture 18, the author discusses the relationship between corporate and political governance. And just for an example, in the terms of corporate governance, there have been numerous scandals in recent years, such as the Enron scandal in early 2000s, and then the Wells Fargo scandal in 2016, which have all highlighted the need for greater accountability and transparency in the way that corporations are run. Many argue that corporate governance needs to be reformed in order to prevent such scandals from occurring in the future. One area of concern is executive compensation, which has risen significantly in recent decades. Many argue that executive compensation is not linked to company performance and does not reflect the contributions of other employees. This has led to calls for reform, such as tying executive compensation to long-term performance metrics, requiring greater transparency on executive pay. In terms of political governance, there has been a growing concern about the influence of money in politics and the need for greater transparency and accountability. Many argue that the current system allows wealthy individuals and corporations to exert undue influence over the political process, leading to policies that favor their interests over those of the general public. One area of major concern is campaign financing, which has been hotly debated for many decades now. Many argue that the current system of campaign finance allows wealthy donors to have a disproportionate impact on political processes, again leading to policies that favor their interests rather than the general public. And this can be done by creating tighter public financing for campaigns and stricter limits on campaign contributions. In summary, corporate and political governance is important, and ensuring that businesses and governments operate in the best interests of society. However, there is a growing concern about the state of corporate and political governance and the need for reform. In particular, there is a need for greater accountability and transparency in both areas, as well as measures to limit the influence of money in politics and ensure that corporate decision-making is aligned with the long-term interests of society. One of the most interesting lectures in the book was the lecture on trade deficits and how they can affect a country, and especially countries like the UK and America who run massive trade deficits every year and have done for many decades now. It is very concerning that more money leaves the country than comes back. So a trade deficit occurs when one country imports more goods and services than it exports. This means the country is buying more from other countries than it is selling to them. So the one way a trade deficit can affect a country is through the balance of payments. Now, the balance of payments is a record of all financial transactions between a country and the rest of the world. When a country runs a trade deficit, it means that it is spending more money out of the country to pay for imports than it is receiving from other countries for their exports. And this can lead to a current account deficit in the balance of payments, which can have negative consequences on a country's economy. Another way a trade deficit can affect a country is through job losses. In certain industries. If a country is importing more goods than it is exporting, it means that there is a higher demand for foreign goods than domestic goods. This can lead to job losses in industries that produce goods that are being imported. For example, a country importing more cars than it's exporting will lead to job losses in the domestic auto industry. So if you think about it, a trade deficit is due to increased exports. So the antidote to a trade deficit is to increase exports. If a country saves more of its income, it will have more money to invest in its own economy, which can lead to increased productivity and competitiveness of its industries that export these goods, which can help reduce the trade deficit by increasing exports and reducing imports. So another important area of economics that we don't really understand is the macroeconomics and GDP. So macroeconomics is the branch of economics that deals with the study of the behavior and performance of an economy as a whole, rather than individual markets or firms. One of the key indicators used to measure the performance of an economy is the gross domestic product, or GDP, which is the GDP is the total value of goods and services produced within a country's borders in a given period, usually a year. GDP is important today because it provides a measure of the overall health and growth of an economy. It is used by policymakers, investors, and businesses to make important decisions about the economy. For example, governments use GDP to set financial policies such as taxation and spending, while businesses use GDP to make decisions about investing and expansion. In addition to measuring economic performance, GDP also provides valuable information about the standards of living of the country. A higher GDP per capita generally indicates a higher standard of living, as it suggests that there are more goods and services available to individuals in the country. However, it is important to note that GDP per capita does not necessarily reflect the distribution of wealth within the country, and some individuals and groups may still experience poverty despite high GDP per capita. There are some criticisms of using GDP as a measurement for economic well-being, as it does not take into account factors such as distribution, environmental degradation, and non-monetary measures of well-being. However, despite the criticism, GDP remains a widely used indicator of economic performance, as it is also an important part of the macroeconomic analysis. So in summary, macroeconomics is the study of the behavior and performance of an economy as a whole, and GDP is a key indicator used to measure the economic performance. GDP is important today as it provides information about the health and growth of an economy, as well as the standard of living of a country. However, it is important to recognize the limitations in using GDP as a measure of well-being, and to consider other factors when making economic decisions. Another important lecture is the discussion of between unemployment and inflation. So the unemployment and inflation trade-off, also known as the Phillips curve, is a concept in macroeconomics that suggests there is a trade-off between inflation and unemployment in the short run. The Phillips curve was named after the economist A.W. Phillips, who first observed this relationship in the 1950s. The Phillips curve suggests that unemployment decreases, inflation tends to increase. And as unemployment increases, inflation tends to decrease. The logic behind this relationship is that when unemployment is low, workers have more bargaining power and are able to negotiate higher wages, which in turn increases costs for firms and leads to higher prices for goods and services. On the other hand, when unemployment is high, workers have less bargaining power and are willing to accept lower wages, which leads to lower costs for firms and lower prices for goods and services. However, this relationship is not necessarily a straightforward one-to-one trade-off. In the short run, changes in inflation and unemployment can be influenced by a variety of factors, such as changes in government policy, international events, and technological advancements. Additionally, the Phillips curve is a short-run relationship, meaning that over the long run, there may be no trade-off between inflation and unemployment. One challenge of managing the Phillips curve is that policymakers may choose between targeting low unemployment or low inflation, as attempting to decrease them both at the same time may lead to conflicting policy measures. For example, lowering interest rates to stimulate economic growth and decrease unemployment will lead to inflation. So in summary, the unemployment and inflation trade-off, or Phillips curve, suggests that there is a short-run trade-off between unemployment and inflation. While the relationships can be influenced by a variety of variables, like policymakers, can be influenced by a variety of factors, such as policymakers must choose between targeting low unemployment or low inflation, as attempting to decrease them both simultaneously may lead to conflicting policy measures. And lastly, my personal favorite, the division of labor and why the free market system is so good at this. So firstly, the division of labor is a process whereby production, where a production process is broken into smaller steps or specialized tasks, allowing each worker to become more skilled and efficient in their assigned task. This process has been a key driver in productivity and economic growth in the past centuries. In a free market system, the division of labor is facilitated by the price system, which signals to producers and consumers where resources are most needed and where they'll be most efficiently used. By allowing individuals and firms to specialize in producing goods and services where they have a competitive advantage, the free market system is able to allocate resources more efficiently than the central planning system. For example, consider the production of a car. In a central planning system, a government agency would determine how many workers should be allocated to each task in the production process. However, in the free market system, individual firms are able to determine the most efficient way to allocate resources based on market pressures or market prices. This means that firms can specialize in specific tasks such as engine assembly, bodywork, or painting, and allowing them to become more efficient and produce higher quality goods at a lower cost. The free market system also allows for competition between firms, which incentivizes them to innovate and find new, more efficient ways to produce goods and services. This competition helps to drive down prices for consumers and encourage firms to continuously improve their production processes. While the division of labor has been a key driver for economic growth and productivity, it is important to note that it can also have negative consequences, such as worker alienation or job insecurity. Additionally, some industries may not be conducive to the division of labor and may require a more holistic approach to production. So in summary, the division of labor is a process whereby production processes are broken down into smaller specialized tasks, allowing each worker to become more skilled and efficient at their assigned task. In the free market system, the division of labor is facilitated by price, allowing firms to specialize in specific tasks and allocate resources more efficiently than the central planning system. While the division of labor has been a key driver to economic growth and productivity, it is important to consider the potential negatives and the limitations to this. And that brings this week's live to an end. Again, it's been a pretty difficult one. I'm not an economist, and I'm trying my best to understand these systems for the simple reason is I want to understand how our country works. I want to understand how our government works. So this is my second delve into economics now. Back in episode 4, I did behavioral economics, and in this one, I did general economics. And I'm continuously trying to learn more about how economies work and how our world has been put together. Because I believe if I can understand where things are going well and where things are going wrong, one day I can make better solutions for myself, my family, my friends, and hopefully my country. But it takes time, and it takes learning, and it takes effort. And what I have seen in my short time since I've started this project is that currently our governments and our political system are not working as well as they should. We have to remember that although capitalism has worked really well for so many decades, we're at a turning point now where we have to decide how we can better serve the people of the world. And capitalism is an important part of that, but it can't be the only part of that. Because we do have to start taking a look at the social welfare of the world. Because the world is changing. And if there's anything we can see by the economics, is that the decisions we're making to make life more comfortable for people is not necessarily doing our countries any good. By increasing our welfare and by increasing our social system, we are putting more pressures on our other system. And it's all about finding a balance. I think if there's one thing that I've identified from this book, is that for every action, there is a equal or almost equal opposite reaction. You know, if we increase interest rates, that means we take money out of the economy. There is a reaction in other areas of the economy. And it's about balancing these actions. What I struggle with, and this happened in the UK just not so long ago, we got Liz Truss, who became Prime Minister for about 6 weeks. I don't think her and her Finance Minister know anything about economics. And they put together this really, really bad economic plan. It sounded great for the people, but it was not achievable on the market. And the country almost crashed. Now, this brings me to one of my small discussions that I have on a regular basis with people, is they love to moan about, government MPs or political people getting paid too much. And I think what we need to establish is, I don't think these people are paid too much. I think we're voting the wrong people in. I don't believe that we are voting the best people for the job. And I don't believe we're getting the best candidates putting themselves forward for the job. It is an incredibly hard job to be a politician, especially a high-level politician where your policies are making changes in people's lives. But I'm struggling with the fact of their education. Now, I'm going to focus more on this in my next week's episode because we're going to discuss the foundation of Western civilization. But just on an economic point of view, if we don't have the right people in power and we are not voting the right people in power, we will never ever solve these economic issues. And focusing on taxing the rich or taxing businesses and all that sort of stuff are great, but they're not going to solve the problems. This is a deep-rooted societal issue, and these issues are only coming to fruition now because the world is changing. We don't have the population booms that we used to have. So our economies are not growing. In the UK, I'd be very surprised if our economy will grow much more. Our birth rate has dropped below 1.7. So we're not going to have a massive flux of new purchases and new people buying. And the younger generation is getting smaller and smaller than the older generation. So at one point, we're going to tip where we're going to have more people retired and less people working. So these are not great economic conditions for a great future. So there is lots to be done, but none of this stuff is getting talked about. People are not getting educated. People are not getting told to start thinking about these things. Every decision we make affects the country because collectively we are the country. So my personal mistakes don't necessarily affect the country, but 100 of us making the same mistake does affect the country. So we have to start discussing how we can make things better. Start saving. Stop using debt. Get rid of your credit cards. Stop worrying about your credit score. Your credit score is a made-up fiction. Save your money. Invest your money. Invest in UK companies. Buy UK products. I've done videos on, get UK power to the cheapest in the world so we can manufacture our own stuff. We need to rebuild our country and manufacture and create jobs and create wealth internally. And we need to be proud of our country and look inwards. Now, I'm not saying stop at all importing, luxury goods from outside. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is we need to focus on what we can do in the UK and increase our trade to the point where we're not in a deficit. We don't have to be making huge amounts of profit. We just not need to get out of the trade deficit. And again, these are my views. I am not an economist. I am just a tradesman that lives in the northeast of England. I do my best for my family and I enjoy reading and I enjoy tackling these complex topics. And I find every time I read a book on this topic, I understand things a little bit more. And with every live I put together, it takes a lot of effort to get all this information and try and deliver it in an interesting manner. But the message I'm trying to get across is we need to educate ourselves. We need to educate ourselves and stop playing these games, these pretend games where people are saying things and it's just not true, or people are inciting issues and making us focus on things that are not important. We need to understand what's important and then we need to make rational solutions to solve these issues. I don't have the answers. I'm trying to find them, and I'm always open to anybody who does have the answers or has an interesting book to read or an interesting solution. So until next time, take care.